By users, for users.
Engineered for flavor.
One of the coolest features around.
A built-in loading tool.
Learn more at www.stonesmiths.ca. This is the Business of Cannabis, a joint venture between the Green Generation Co. and the Cannabis 101 podcast. Bringing you the latest bud, biz, buzz.
Melka LaBelle of the Green Generation Co. joining me on the Business of Cannabis. Find out how Melka can help you at www.greengencompany.com. And Melka, before we get started, I just thought I'd give you a look at what my office view is. I'm sure Southern Alberta isn't a whole lot different, but I'm trying to embrace winter this year. So looking at it and then going out and making snow angels is how I'll do that.
Yeah, we had that storm too. You know what? It was so windy, it didn't stick.
Oh.
So it's really sunny. It's cold, but it definitely snowed, but it was too windy for it to stick.
Well, this is one of the times where I'm very grateful I live in a condo and I do not have to shovel, because all I saw on social media were people shoveling over and over and over again. And if you wait until it stops snowing, the snow is so heavy, so you kind of have to do it. So I've been there before. Glad I'm not there now. But anyway, let's get to our lead topic on the business of cannabis. And we talked a lot about heading into the U.S. election, what kind of impact, and through all the gong show that has been the U.S. election and still is, the one thing that was the biggest winner was cannabis.
100%. So the stat that I got today was that now 4 more states were legalized. That was Arizona, New Jersey, South Dakota, and Montana. But now 1 in 3 American citizens live in a legal recreational state. So if you think about the population, largely in California and all of the states that are green, that's 1/3 of Americans live in a legal rec state. So that's huge. I mean, if you talk about, tipping the point around what's really popular, Americans have said it. They like cannabis, and they voted for it. They voted for it directly through a plebiscite or on their ballot, which means it wasn't an election issue. It was on the ballot for them to vote on specifically. So that's a huge vote for the cannabis sector, and very important. But I think what more importantly out of all of this is how does that impact us as Canadians and our what was once thought of as really our true differentiator and our lead in legal cannabis legalization. I think what the key takeaways here are that this has really helped, partly to end the stigma, but more primed the population of investment community, and for them to sort of really pay attention and look at what are the differentiated types of opportunities to invest in and where their particular investment proclivity lies, particularly for public companies. So now that we've seen sort of this whole, cannabis had a 1.0 with a massive boom on expectations, and then a 2.0 with 2.0 coming out. Now we're really starting to see where the cards fall when it comes to publicly traded cannabis companies. And many of the US companies are traded on Canadian stock exchanges, which means that they have to have a head office or have an office somewhere in Canada, whether on paper or whatever. But what that means is that that's going to impact our own opportunity as collecting taxes from those companies and giving more visibility from a public perspective on how these companies are operating. So that's a huge good thing for Canada, but also makes it much more competitive. So the Canadian companies operating in the Canadian space are now sort of up against the operations and the profitability on the stock market against some of these larger, really now companies that are multi-state operators. So MSOs, I'm not sure if you've heard that term before, Dean, but the MSO is considered the multi-state operators, and it really is a result of, you know, how cannabis unveiled in the US, where each state chose to become legal, as opposed to in Canada where it's federally legal, and then each province sort of just gets to roll out the regulations. But multi-state operators, similar to how in Canada we have this patchwork of different types of regulations, multi-state operators have had to figure out how to operate their business model in more than one jurisdiction with different rules applying. So from a business standpoint, what I like about this is that it's similar in Canada, where everybody is sort of still a small guy. There is no such thing as like big companies that are doing a rollout across an entire country. And it's really like almost from the ground up. And this benefits Canada. It sort of levels the playing field, I guess, is the best way to describe it.
That it really is kind of interesting how I guess the lead that we had, the 2-year lead, as you kind of talked about being competitive, could vanish very quickly. And I really hope this maybe forces Canada to take a look at themselves.
Yeah, not only that, but it also primes Canadian companies for merger and acquisition activity. So we've talked about this a little bit before on our last podcast. So the Canadian companies are going to be trying to get pretty shiny up for their potential acquirement by U.S. companies or vice versa. So this merger and acquisition situation that's been happening across the board very rapidly, if people aren't paying attention and they're just sort of now tuning in that cannabis is something that they should invest in, they're kind of behind the ball. But there's a lot of groups that are really trying to make this as clear as muddily possible in a new industry. But my bet is on the ancillary companies. And we've talked about these guys before. There's a lot of them. We're both ancillary companies operating sort of alongside the cannabis sector, talking about and sharing information, as well as collecting data from all of companies that are either multi-state, multi-jurisdictional, or cross-border. So we've talked before about Dutchy doing this, a lot of the data companies, a lot of the companies that I talk about that are running sort of software systems, they're not really a regulated good. They're still just a software company in a regulated industry. So for me, those are the ones to watch. That's where my attention goes, is how are these companies tracking this information of new potential clients, prospects in all these different regions, and what are the different landscape of regulation around it? The other big thing is that, with COVID kind of playing into this as being an accelerant to the industry, we're seeing this whole concept of vices, and what is a vice category or a vice investment category. So vices, I love the picture, that graphic there is funny, but it's, we're talking about gambling, you're talking about cannabis, talking about sex tech and the sex industry, as well as the tobacco, gaming. Those are all, and alcohol obviously being the biggest one, those are all considered vice industries where, when things are shitty and we're in the life and in the world of people, these types of industries and these products thrive. And my argument, and I talk about this in my blog, I have a lot of commentary around why cannabis is a good vice, where a vice tends to hurt you in the long term. It tends to be addictive. It tends to drain your bank account, and it tends to get you hooked on something that isn't really a good behavioral activity. But now that cannabis is becoming legal across, North America, the stigma and the why it's bad for you argument is largely being talked about in it's not real anymore. That the positive aspects of cannabis and the benefits are coming out more and more, how it's healthier for you than some of these other vices. It doesn't have the same kind of addictive qualities. You can still function, and it can actually be good for people in the long run to use cannabis as a protective of their own bodies in the face of such, harsh things like COVID and other things. We haven't heard categorically, the research is still out yet, is still to be determined. But what we're learning is that our bodies are primed to use cannabis for a long term, and that is a good thing. And more of that will come as more legalization and more research happens.
Yeah, it's that certainly the best thing. And Canadian companies getting involved has already happened. We talked about it on This Week in Cannabis News earlier, that Afria has purchased Sweetwater Brewing, and so Canadian companies were eyeing this up. Who we'll see once the election ever ends, what happens with decriminalization and moving towards federally. But right now, certainly going by state, the Americans are gaining on this 2-year lead that Canada has had, and it's going to take some work, and it's going to take Canada, our company and our country rather, and our government to say, okay, do we want to be the leader of cannabis in the world? And a decision is going to have to be made.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll wait to see what changes on our regulatory side. I am involved in a lot of those policy conversations with industry and government, and there are some roundtables happening for more engagement on how our government should change things. So that's actually starting right now in the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned and check that out if you're interested in learning more. You can definitely contact me for more information on those discussions.
Alrighty, let's get to change makers now, and tell us what we're talking about when it comes to change makers and literally making a change out there when it comes to some products.
Yeah, so this is sort of an interesting play on letters and words. I think this is really neat. So this company or this product they're really focusing on hemp-based packaging solutions. They call themselves HWWH, and I believe it stands for Heal the World with Hemp Packaging. And this is, I think, a Alberta-based company, and they're really trying to lean in to obliterate the boon of the plastics in the cannabis sector. We know that the cannabis packaging laws around how cannabis is contained has literally harmed the plant inside the package, and really reduces the actual enjoyment of getting those terpene profiles. And the LPs and the producers of cannabis have really been like scratching their heads on like, how do we get past this whole packaging situation? So this company is coming up with a solution to make packaging out of I believe it's cannabis waste products. So when you're producing cannabis in cultivation and processing, there is an amount that has to be disposed of for various reasons, and it can't be consumed into the body, but it can be repurposed as a pulp or a fiber that can be mixed with more hemp fiber to make a sustainable actual packaged good. So we're talking about boxes and jars and containers where they're made from hemp and other waste cannabis fibers that are demonstrably more sustainable than using, native or raw forestry products. And because they're hemp-based, this is kind of creating this circular type economy. They're local, like they're in Alberta, I believe, and that means that they're making their products so that people in Alberta and the producers in Canada can use them from, without having that carbon footprint of crossing an ocean. So that's really cool. And I think they're working towards compostable containers as well. But for right now, some of the initial things that I've seen have been really neat, and I can't wait to see what this company does. So this is my change maker for the week.
Yeah, www.hwwhpackaging.com. I really like that. I love this concept, and our very second episode way back when on this show was all about hemp and the amount of products that we can make, and I don't know why we just don't have giant hemp fields growing everywhere just for the benefit of the environment, and I don't know why hempcrete isn't used more when it comes to building products.
Yeah, I'm working on that one too. I got some clients that are talking about that too. The hempcrete is a great conversation. We'll save that one for another day, and I'll definitely bring some examples of what people are trying to do in that space. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it really is, and just we've talked about hemp a few different times in this segment, and it's certainly well worth it. We also like to talk about what it means to be green, and in this case, the headliner for this, what it means to be green, is a lack of green as an indicator is not a good thing. So tell us what you're chatting about here.
Yeah, so this just came to my site when we're watching the COVID maps, and with all the different parts of the country and the world, and where COVID numbers are going up. Green generally means that things are getting better. So as in the case of the screenshot this was a US one, but the Canadian ones were equivalent. There has been very little green left on the map, which means that the COVID numbers, people infection rates are going up, not down. It's getting worse, not better. And that's what I was highlighting with what it means. Green usually means that things are good. And in this case, not so good. Even in Alberta, we're seeing more restrictions about, having to stay home and not have people over. But what I really wanted to touch on here was COVID is a symptom of a much larger societal problem. COVID is literally a disease, and it's a population control mechanism. I bring up our lovely friend over here, Thomas Malthus, from like the 1890s. We've talked about him before.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important that this subject matter comes up, because in the 1890s, when he wrote his book, An Essay on the Principles of Population, and I studied about him in my social studies class in high school, what we were talking about at the time was how basically our entire planet is a living thing. And as humans, we are not in control. and having COVID levels rise is not a problem that we get to fix. It is a problem that we have to essentially just deal with, because the planet will tell us if we've got it right or not. And I know this is kind of ominous and seems very ethereal, but what I'm trying to say is that Thomas Malthus talked about three major hypotheses of how populations control exist. And war is a major one, famine, and disease. And in 2020, we're dealing with the disease of COVID, which is essentially because of famine. And famine is as a result of climate change and migration of people in different regions, moving to different parts of the world because they can't literally live where they were from because the temperatures are too high and there's no food for them to eat. These are examples of what are the steps that sort of happen for population to be controlled, and that means population to decrease. So I'm just highlighting that this is kind of doom and gloomy, but there's a reason for this. COVID was not a man-made disaster. COVID is an example of the planet saying, back off, people. There's too many of you, and I can't keep working as a planet for you all to live here at the same time. So that's what this is. This is the planet's symptom of us saying that we've encroached on the environment too much, and we need to back up and backtrack. And we've already started seeing this with COVID. Is that population density of areas that were super high dense there's a lot more rural real estate being sold. Like the numbers of people buying houses in less dense areas is on the rise as a direct result of COVID. So we're starting to see the population spread out, which is a good thing. That means the people can be maintained in different places and not be so, draining on the resources and climate in the centers that are closest to oceans and other natural habitats. But, how are we going to survive? What is it going to take for the human species to survive? It's not up to us. It's up to the planet to decide that. So I think vaccine is definitely a good way for us to be inoculated against COVID, but it's not the answer. It's only one part of the picture. But what it really means is becoming greener, being more respectful of our planet, and treating our planet with way more respect than we treat ourselves. Because if the planet isn't healthy, then we're not going to exist anymore. So that's my dark yet ethereal way of talking about what it means to be green.
Well, we saw in the very early stages of COVID-19, and who knows if we'll see it again, the way it's trending. I'm not optimistic over the last little while that it's going to get a whole lot better. I hope it does. But we saw in the kind of the early stages when the entire world shut down. Like you saw the Vegas Strip empty. You saw animals coming back to places where they didn't normally encroach on. I mean, they were returning to, and we saw some of the smog going away. So it's I don't know how you can deny the science anymore when the evidence was there of when the world basically shut down, the earth got healthier.
Yeah, and I think we need to pay attention to that a hell of a lot more. Yeah. It's not being highlighted enough, but this is what it means to be green. This is why I'm doing what I'm doing, and that the industrialization of our planet, the CPG model, all of those things are examples of where the money is what matters, and it really the conversation has to change. And I think we're now seeing that a lot more, but it still we have to push even harder, and that's what it's all about. That's why I'm here, the Green Generation Company.
I'm with you on that one. A healthier planet is better for us and those that will come after us. Melka, thank you so much for joining me. I leave you with one more look at my view outside of my office here. Check out www.greengencompany.com and find out how Melka can help you. Thanks as always, Melka.
Thanks, Dean. Have a great week.